Hello, my name is Dan Hennen. Today is December 27th, 2020, and this is episode 12 of The Gray Stage. We're reviewing the book authored by Greg Fernandez Jr. called The Gray Stage. He'll be joining me today and going through chapter 7 of the book. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hey, Dan. Always glad to be here. This will be another very interesting show here. I wanted to kind of try to get to the whole office bedroom in one show, but I think there's just way too much for us to cover in just one show here.
Yeah, there is a lot, and for those following along, it's chapter 7 we'll be covering today. The first half of that begins in the softcover book on page 57. If you're following along, no need to, of course. You can just listen to this, but this episode is good because Greg will also be showing photographs in the background as like the other episodes. So if you can, it's very important to watch the video version of this. Chapter 7, once again, page 57. The title of this is The Office Bedroom. And for those, just to clarify, the Crowley family in Apple Valley bought a 3-bedroom home in 2013. The bodies were found January 17th of 2015. It is a 3-bedroom home. It's a rambler. The master bedroom was where David and Comel slept. Rania had another bedroom for her. The 3rd bedroom wasn't used as a bedroom or a guest room per se, but David turned that into his office. And so the title of this chapter is called The Office Bedroom, and this is what we're going to be focusing on today. It starts off with saying, Item 27 is a blood stain in the hallway just outside of David's office bedroom. DNA results tied the blood to Comel. So what do we have here, Greg? You got the information here, the photos. It's item 27 is really just a blood stain found in the hallway.
Yep.
And ties to Comel. Mm-hmm. So far, the blood we've been seeing throughout the home has all been Comel's for the most part, right? The large amounts.
And I was looking at these photos to see if there was any other blood or if it's just this one little spot. And of course, with the images, sometimes it's really hard to tell. But it does look like it's just one little swipe. So here's item 27. Maybe a couple swipes here, something going on, maybe a couple fingers or something passing by. But it looks very out of place. There's no other blood in this area. It looks kind of like a finger swipe. There's no blood on the carpet that we can see. If people that are looking at this image, looking at item 27, does this help us see when the bloody footprints were possibly on the wood floor? Meaning, can we tell which way that the blood is being swiped in this image? Left to right, right to left. It doesn't look like north to south or south to north. Would you agree with that, Dan? It looks like left to right or...
Yes, and it's near the door frame, so it looks like someone either entering or exiting that room left it behind. It's not cast-off blood. It's not high or medium velocity blood spatter per se. It's smeared, much like that Kleenex box in the kitchen.
Yep, kind of the same type of thing. So looking at that one, glad you brought up that Kleenex too, because that was another one. You can. This almost looks, if you were to compare the image of item 26 to 27, it looks like very, very similar actually. But so looking at this, can we tell if this is going into the office? Is this a finger or a blood swipe going into the office, or does it look like it's leaving the office?
I can't tell. Once again, I'm not an expert. I don't even know if an expert looking at this would be able to tell, but maybe we can get someone to comment on that to see if it's someone going, in or out of the office. I would assume it's from the right hand, perhaps, going into that office room versus the left hand. Either way, it seems like it's someone's hand or finger that was covered with blood. Just once again, a smear.
Right. And so
because we do see blood in that office, we know there was activity going back and forth from that hallway to the office.
Right. And we know that
would make sense, but it does appear to be just a smear from someone's finger.
From someone's finger. Yeah, I think, and I got an image up here of the tissue, which, like you said, it does kind of look similar to that. I know there's a and so this was to kind of understand which happened first. You know, was the office writing, did that happen first? Did the laptop writing happen first? Did the blood writing happen first? It's all kind of just, I was hoping, you know, with all this, they would be able to kind of piece together some type of theory, right? I mean, if they're going to blame David, it seems like, okay, what is their theory about what did David do first? Which writing did he do first? Did he do second? Did he do third? And we don't see any of that, right? They haven't really gotten into that, maybe because they just simply don't know. But then again, it goes back to the whole thing. What do they know, and what do we see here within all of this that will help us understand why they believe David is guilty?
And I'm glad you have this photo of the Kleenex box, because this too, we know it's blood. We know it's human blood. In fact, it's Comel's. But is this swiped or smeared from a finger that would leave a fingerprint behind, or is this blood smeared with someone wearing a latex glove? My same question is for the one on item 27 outside the hallway. Yes, it's blood. It looks to me like it's staged or planted there, or staged on purpose there. It wasn't an accident. But the question is there fingerprints? Is there ridges? Can we do a fingerprint test to identify? Now, if David did this, meticulously planned to kill his wife, daughter, and then himself, there would be no need for him to be wearing a latex glove at all. So this is the important question is there a fingerprint? Is there ridge detail? Because if someone was wearing a glove, we have another whole issue altogether. Why would someone be wearing a glove if this was a double homicide followed by a suicide? Now, if this was a triple homicide, which we have deemed it to be, there most certainly would be someone wearing a glove or a pair of gloves or a latex glove or some kind of glove to cover up the fingerprints. And this looks exactly like what we're seeing here.
So there's the swipe right there, whatever it is. Does it look like just one finger, maybe two fingers? I mean, it's pretty thick here.
Yeah, maybe one or two, but once again it's a swipe or what I would call a smear. Mm-hmm. It's not a fingerprint. It's not it's not cast off blood. Someone left it there behind. I can't tell once again if they're going into the office or out of the office.
It just looks very out of place. It really does. Similar, like you said, similar to item 26, to the tissue box.
What we have to do is ask ourselves, is it authentic, number one? Was it actually left there accidentally, or was it planted there on purpose? Or did someone, one of the killer or killers, make a mistake and leave this blood behind? Was it a mistake? I don't know if there's even an answer to that, as it probably doesn't even matter whether it's the who left it behind or why. But my thinking is that the most important thing is here, is it a exposed finger with ridge detail, or is it something smeared, left behind by someone wearing a glove of some sort? And I think that's the most important point. And I don't see finger ridge detail there.
No, they don't mention any. I think the only ridge detail is the palm. I think that's mentioned a little bit. I think.
Yeah, and once again, as you mentioned, Greg, there's not much mentioned. And when you take a step back and look at the entirety of this crime scene, there's very little fingerprints left behind. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of blood left behind. Very few fingerprints left behind. Mm-hmm. Like I said, there's a palm print, but it's very interesting that with all this blood, there's very little fingerprints left on anything, which I think raises the much larger question for the listeners out there.
And to
there should
try,
be fingerprints all over this place.
yeah, there should
If
be.
someone planned and meticulously planned this event and did it themselves, there should be fingerprints all over the house. The fact that there's none is there's hardly any fingerprints here. Very strange. And that's one of the things that you and I think, you and I agree on, Greg, is that what the detectives in this case, seasoned detectives that do this for a living, wouldn't that raise their suspicion to say, why isn't there more fingerprints here in the home? There are none. It appears that the handgun was wiped down. No fingerprints on that. There's a lot of blood around, but there's no fingerprints. There's writing on the wall with no fingerprints. So that's what we're getting at here for the listeners, just to understand the much bigger picture here, that I would think even an armchair investigator would, these kinds of questions would come jumping out to people not even in the industry by saying, there should be fingerprints. Why aren't there fingerprints? In other words, why did the killer wear gloves?
Yep, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because we were talking last night with one of our newer members, William Rail, and we were talking about the blood on the living room wall, and wondering if it's possible that there was other blood that was wiped up first, and then somebody wrote Allahu Akbar on the living room wall. And I wonder if there was a lot of blood, if it's possible. I mean, it's possible, but is it plausible that there was a lot of blood that was wiped up, and this might have been one of the blood spots that was missed? You see around the house, especially next to the kitchen island, it looks like there's like wet drops, almost like somebody was cleaning up something, maybe cleaning up blood, I don't know, cleaning up a spill. Could have been a spill that had nothing to do with it, but that would be some of the other things that I would look for. Also, next to the dog cage in the living room, and I'll pull up just a photo of the house layout, but kind of where we see item 33, there's a dog cage there, and when they move that dog cage, it does look like a bunch of like wet drops. Maybe, I don't know what type of cleaner. I mean, maybe listeners can help us with this too. What would you need to clean up blood, and would it leave stains? Would it leave any markings? You know, I used to have green walls, and we would have stains, and even after we cleaned it up, it would still leave these weird puddle drips that I see similar to this house. But I don't see a lot of that in the hallway, but again, we only have certain photos there of that. So
the next paragraph is the office. Blood found on the computer desk, labeled as item 39, was swabbed and collected by Beth Wolf. The item was submitted for nuclear DNA testing. Though the blood was never tested, the item was, quote, retained in its entirety at the BCA lab, end quote. Now, this is very interesting, Greg. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, this is still, it's another one of, well, why wouldn't it be tested, right? I mean, you would think that everything should have been tested.
And maybe we go to the good side here,
Sure.
The positive. What did the detectives do that was correct? So Beth Wolf gets it, she swabs it, collects it, and submits it for nuclear DNA testing. I think she did everything according to her job description perfect. She did what she needed to do. The next sentence, though, which you hit right on the head, is the blood itself was never tested, but it was retained. So I think everything Beth Wolf did here was correct according to a BCA special agent? You know, she submitted it, she swabbed it, and submitted it. What more could she have done? Now, someone along the way made the decision not to get it tested, but it was retained in its entirety. Now, the only thing I can think of here is when you start testing blood that you have blood from a crime scene, which is really your inventory of blood. Once you start using that for DNA testing, that inventory goes down. It's reduced. So So if you ever need it later, if the case is ever reopened, or reinvestigated down the road, you have that much less blood to use. So I think at this point, the only thing I could, my opinion here would be that they had enough blood to test that they didn't want to test this to use up that inventory. But hey, let's keep it in case we need it down the road. So let's retain it. Is that fair enough statement?
Yeah. I really like the way that you phrase that. It sounds much nicer than how I was thinking about phrasing it. But that's true. So it is good that they have it, but obviously somebody like me who doesn't know anything about what gets tested, why they test this, why they don't test that, it's that makes sense, and I am very glad that they still have it. I hope that we're
so
6 years later.
If it was tested, it would come back as Comel's, is what I think the officials, what they're leading to here is that they would have expected it to come back as Comel's blood, which wouldn't have really changed anything. But in the meantime, they would have used up that much more blood to get the testing done, and the expense of getting the testing done. So they elected not to test this. But you're right. In our case here with this Crowley case, we don't know if it's a mixture of other people's blood. We don't know if it's David's blood. We don't know whose blood it is because it was never tested. We can assume it was Comel's because, according to the official narrative, David shouldn't have been bleeding at any point during all this. And more than likely it was Comel's. But once again, a triple homicide that comes across the city of Apple Valley, which is very, very strange, very non-common, very unique. One would think that they would spare no expense and no time, expense, or resources in doing all of the investigation, all of the research, getting all their ducks in a row. And here, once again, we're already in chapter 7 of this book, and we've seen this time and time again where they had the option or the opportunity to do additional testing, and it was declined.
Yeah. So Dan, you've shown that once again, another thing that they didn't test, item 39. Okay, that's fine. They don't want to test this desk. They don't want to test the blood on this desk here. Okay, that's great. But they're going to test the pen and the notepad, right?
Yeah, and that's what coming up here in the next couple of paragraphs is very interesting. And once again, to reiterate, Apple Valley, Minnesota has a population of maybe 40 to 45,000 people. It's not that large. They're not dealing with homicides. They're not dealing with large-scale crime. These homicide detectives are not so overly burdened with dealing with homicides nonstop that they're going to say, you know what, let's take a couple shortcuts in this case. We already know who did it.
Well, but
they average one homicide per year.
But this is the BCA's job, right? Or this is where I think we've talked about this previously too. Does the Apple Valley Police decide, or does the BCA choose what does and what doesn't get tested?
Well, I would say that BCA, even if they were the ones doing the investigation, if they came back and said that we did not or choose not to test this blood, that I, as the lead detective, Officer James Gummert in this case, would have pushed back to say, you know what, I think you should test this. And so whether that was done or not, I think they still would have had the option to push forward and to say, I want you to test all of the blood to make sure that we're all on the right same page here. And that's what I do not believe was done.
Right. And it's good that they still have that swab, because maybe someday we can get item 39 along with some other items tested.
Well, correct. If they reopen the case and find out that it's neither David or Comel's or Ranya's blood, who else's is it? Then we got big issues. But yes, we're glad that they do have it in inventory.
Cool.
Now, item 40. This is on the top of page 58 for those following along in the book. Item 40 is the pen found next to the notepad on the computer desk. Blood found on the grip of the pen was labeled as item 40-1. And so what we have here is the pen taken in, basically identified here in the investigation as item 40. They found the grip of the pen, blood was on it, they labeled it. Now it goes on to say that the pen was not one of the items submitted for nuclear DNA testing. The pen was not one of the 3 latent prints suitable for comparison to David Crowley. So how do we know David used the pen to write on the notepad nearby? And that's where that paragraph ends. Very interesting. They decide to take the blood from the pen. And it looks like it wasn't submitted for nuclear. And the latent prints that were allegedly on there was not suitable for comparison, which means it was either wiped down or was small enough, or someone was perhaps wearing a glove, but there was hardly any prints on that pen that were even suitable for comparison. I would guess David Crowley's fingerprints would be all over that pen.
They should be. They should be. I mean, it's you can look at the image where the pen was. It's nicely and neatly placed. Oh, I'm sure we do this all the time. I'm sure anytime anybody kills people and, then wants to kill themselves, they just go and write a little note and place the pen ever so nicely, so neatly right next to it on the right hand side, so people know that I'm right-handed. More evidence that David is right-handed here. But again, the most frustrating thing is the thing that the news reports won't tell you, the thing that the Apple Valley Police Department won't comment on, BCA won't talk about, and you won't find it in any Netflix documentary either. Once again, the pen was not tested. It was not tested. That's a problem. That's a big problem. A huge problem here, because I can understand not testing the blood on the desktop next to the pen, but not testing the pen when there's blood on it? That to me
especially when they're trying to link this to a potential suicide note written by the killer.
Right.
Is what they're trying to link here. The narrative they're trying to push is that this is a potential another suicide note, which we also know that this is not. But you're right. The pen is neatly on the right hand side. It's this scene leaves all these subliminal messages here, coded messages, that the average person looking at it is not going to understand, but detectives looking at it, they're going to fall right into the trap. It's on the right side. Oh, it's a right-handed person. David's pen, David's office, David's desk, David's notepad. Oh, obviously he wrote it all. So was it tested? No.
I don't understand that. But surely they test other items. They test the notepad. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you would think that they would test 39, 40, and 41 to make sure that all of them match, that the DNA results should all be exactly the same. This would be a slam dunk case to prove David Crowley guilty here. Maybe not, but I mean, that would at least, I think a lot of people would be more open to it, and they would take it more seriously. They would at least try to invest some time into giving the police the benefit of the doubt, like many of us did, until we learned a lot of these clear facts. And then it's like, well, I'd love to just believe whatever the cops tell us. The problem is what they're telling us is not backed by facts. It's backed by fiction, and that's just not good. You don't want to do that in a case like this, where we're talking about they knew who David Crowley was. They knew that what he was talking about. They knew the conspiracies, all of that stuff. So they should have, just based on that, it feels like they should have gone the extra mile to make sure that they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that David Crowley was guilty. We didn't get any of that. We got bully tactics. We got people making up things, people lying. But we didn't get any truth to show us where the evidence shows that David Crowley is guilty. And the more documents that we got, the more we can see that, they don't have anything to prove David Crowley guilty. So the fact that they didn't test 39, didn't test 40, is a big deal. And I think that a lot of people just don't know. They just don't realize that is a fact, that those two items were not tested.
Correct. Very important. And not even tested, like you say in the book here, is one of the items that wasn't even submitted for nuclear DNA testing. It was never even submitted. Therefore,
Yeah.
it couldn't have even been tested by those in the lab doing the tests because it wasn't even given to them. It was never submitted.
Right. Why not?
Very odd. All right, let's go to the bottom of page 58, starting with item 41.
Okay.
Item 41 is the actual notepad found on the computer desk in the office bedroom. Authorities found the notepad flipped open to page 30 of 59. And so let's cover that a little bit, Greg. The notepad, we have researched that spiral-bound notepad in the office, and it does say that originally that notepad was purchased, it was an 80-page notepad. What they have here is there's 30, this was upon page 30 of the 59 that remain in the spiral notepad. So pages basically 60 through 80 were ripped out, not necessarily in that order, but all the investigators, when they came to the scene, there's only 59 pages left in that spiral-bound notepad. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it was 80 originally, so I know they used that for their budget and some recipes and some notes and things like that. Whether it related to David's business or not, that notebook happened to be in the office. So 59 pages remained, and the way investigators do that, they count page 1 from the first page all the way to the end. The last page was 59. They said that this was flipped open to the 30th page in that notebook, and it said, "Open the Rise most recent version and submit to Allah now." Now, back to the book. On page 30 were two strange, unexplained sentences. The first was, quote, "Open the Rise most recent version." The second message was, "Submit to Allah now." Neither of these two messages were ever labeled as suicide notes by authorities. More importantly, who can prove David wrote the two messages?
Now, what would they need to prove it? What would we need to be satisfied? And more importantly, for any investigators, for any cops out there, ask yourself this. What would you need to prove David Crowley wrote this here? What test would you... The
common answer would be a handwriting analysis test that proves that David was the author of these two messages. But we have a problem with this, Greg, because there was no handwriting analysis done on this notepad. Now, it looks like David's writing. It appears to be David's writing. And by looking at it myself, to the naked eye, it does appear that David wrote it. But that's not good. That's not good enough. That's not good for a court of law to bring up in a case. You need to have evidence. Did David write this? I don't know. That's the question. Who wrote the messages?
And we got...
According to here's the other pages he's showing you. Different bills, budget, monthly budget that him and Comel used for utility bills.
That they both wrote in, apparently. We only have 24 pages, too, which is another interesting thing. They made clear that there were 59 pages, so we didn't get every page that we should have, that they have. I don't know why certain pages were excluded. The only reason that I can think of, the only valid reason, is because they were just blank. But obviously,
I'm guessing the same thing. The blank ones, they wouldn't have a need to photograph or make copies of, I don't think.
But that would have been easier for them if they already had it in a file. All 59 pages, they must have had it in a digital file. Instead of giving us the digital file, they had to go through it first and pick what pages they wanted to give us and not give us, which is a problem there too. I don't know if that's legal. I don't know if that's necessary, to be honest with you. But this book did start, like Dan said, this was a 80-page sheet. There were 80 sheets, 6 by 9, and you can see at the bottom of this looks like it was started out as a budget book. You can see, they're paying close attention to their budgets here. Only a couple pages are the actual budgets, but if you look at the bottom, you'll kind of note these 41A-1. Those are the page numbers, and you'll see this F means that it is the front. So you'll see F on some of these pages, and then you'll see B on some of these pages to show it's front and then back. But both, David,
I think the interesting thing is here, Greg, is that we look at someone who's new to the case will read the police report and say, boy, this was a family struggling with finances. He killed himself. End of story. Problem solved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when citizen investigators file FOIA requests for the FOIA and get back reports like this that show page after page after page of family budget, estimated due dates, when bills should be paid, what we see here is very high level attention to detail for utility bills, monthly bills. This really actually, other than this one page, Open the Rise, that the official narrative is using to claim David as the killer, the other pages all are huge support for these guys being very frugal with their finances and being very disciplined is what I see in this notebook.
Yeah.
Which is a very different story than what we see as the official narrative.
That's right. And of course, there is blood. You can clearly see that there's blood on these pages here. Like this is actually, it's another interesting thing that this is the back, and I know we'll get more deep into what's in the notepad on our follow-up show to this one here, but this is kind of weird too, because where the Submit to Allah, Open the Rise Now, it's actually written on the back of one of the pages, of page 30 here. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, to write it on the back, not necessarily on the front, like I would kind of assume, but then there's blood. There's lots of blood here on a lot of these different pages, so obviously when they did not test it, it really stands out, because everybody, I would think, okay, it's very easy, let's go ahead and let's look at this, let's figure out whose blood, let's do some writing samples. And like you said, it was like none of that was done. They had their killer, they had their story, they had their theory, which is all that they have, by the way. It's just a theory, a very weak theory too. And as we go on, that's the only reason this podcast is even here is because of how weak their theory is. So
I think that one could argue also that the notepad here is a mistake by the real killers, because they could have had David write that, tear that page out and leave that on the desk for the officers to see right next to the pen. Problem solved. But what they did was they did not tear it out. They left it there in and amongst all of these other very disciplined budgets and notes and how much things are and how much things are going to be each month, and did they pay them, nice and neat schedules. One could argue that the killers made a mistake by leaving it in there.
It's true.
So, but Open the Rise, for the newer people following this case, The Rise was a documentary David was working on that was like a sister project to The Gray State, and The Rise was a documentary. It had versions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's multiple versions, and so that's what he means here is what they're alluding to. Open the Rise, most recent version, is a note meant for the reader, whoever was the intended reader, to open to the most recent version. And so there was multiple versions. David was finishing up The Rise, that documentary, and one of his goals was to have that done by the end of the year. I think December 31st, 2014 was his goal, to get that done and actually released for free on YouTube by the end of the year. And so why would he leave a note that says, Open the Rise, most recent version? And so was that a a to-do list for him the next morning to get up and work on that. But right beneath there is submit to Allah now, and there is blood smears on that page.
Doesn't add up.
So very interesting. Now the next page, we're on page 59. The bloody visual ridge detail was found on the following pages. 41A. So this book, this notebook was 41. The notepad was item 41. So all these are going to have 41. So 41A-30. The back of that page had ridge detail. 41A-31 front and back. 41A-31-1. 41A-32 front of the page. 41A-33 front of the page. 41A-34 front with possible RD, which is ridge detail. And then finally 41A/58 back. And there's only 59 pages in that book, so it's the second to the last page. There was ridge detail found on the back of that page. What do we have for notes there, Greg?
Yeah, I think this is where we kind of see that he's flipping through these pages, right? Whoever, if this is David with bloody fingerprints, which would make sense if this maybe was one of the last things that he wrote, because, you know, if he's supposed to have written the living room wall, we know there's blood there. Obviously, we know there's blood on the laptop in the kitchen. And so what I found interesting about where the ridge detail was is he's flipping. They're flipping to a certain page here. Not just like opening up just one page. Okay, I'm just going to write this here. It's multiple pages. And throughout this case, especially recently in the last couple months, what I've been looking for, if there was a hostage situation in this house, what type of clues would David leave? What type of clues would he know to leave? So that's speculation, 100%. I'm totally speculating on that. But the fact that there isn't just one, like he just, you know, he's gone crazy, he's in this mode, and he picks up the pen and he writes this. That's not what's happening here. He's flipping through pages. Someone is flipping through multiple pages to get to a certain page. It's a staged crime scene. It's meant to, there is a purpose to this, to going to this certain page here. What was written on these pages could have already been there. And somebody is just using fingers, just using things to flip through it. But who the hell does that? Why flip through anything? Are you checking other notes? Are you looking at things? Oh, I'm just going to flip through these pages to see what's bloody, to see what's not. And it's not like it's on all of them either. But they spend a lot of time here. They spend a lot of time on the notebook. So obviously we would expect to find, and we'll talk about that as we go on here, that they tested the notebook to see whose blood and everything is on it. We know that there is blood on it. There's no doubt there. We know that there's ridge detail, that they're finding it there, but it's just kind of left open about why is it on these certain pages and why is it on so many pages. And this is just the ones that they could use to show that there was bloody ridge detail. This wouldn't include any spots, any little specks of blood that they found on other pages there. So that really stood out to me for those reasons.
So next on the reading down of the paragraph, it mentions basically that items on page 35, 36, and 37 had minimal apparent blood on the bottom edges. BCA analyst Jennifer Kostrowski's notes dated July 14th, 2015 states she spoke with Joe Cooksley about which items should be processed for latent prints. Kostrowski was told, quote, it was sufficient to only process pages with RD, ridge detail in apparent blood. Other pages return to item packaging, no LP processing on item 41. LP is latent prints. So once again, she said, I've got them collected. I've got some prints. Which one should be processed? And basically, Cooksley says that only process the ones that have ridge detail in blood. If there's blood and there's ridge detail, let's process those. Let the others go.
And no latent print processing on item 41.
No latent print processing on item 41. So item 41 again is the notepad. Interesting. Now, results of the alternate light source examination were conclusive. Quote, examinations of the front and back cover of the notebook, item 41, and the 59 pages that were originally within the notebook, items 41A1 through 41A59, failed to reveal any latent writing material. End quote. So really no latent prints in the entire notebook.
So again, we're not seeing
including
anything.
The front and back cover.
Right. Which there should be. Because there is blood on the front and back cover. So if there is, then, you know, it wasn't like this page was opened here. It wasn't opened and then somebody wrote open the rise. This to me shows that the notepad at some point was closed, maybe even possibly closed first. And maybe not even left here on this table here. But these are just all strange things that by themselves, you're like, oh, okay, maybe that, you know, casts a little hole. When you add them all up, that's where you can really see, once again, it's like, okay, we're waiting for any evidence. Where is it? And here we are. They've gone through this, and actually, if you read some of these notes, and they're in order mostly. If you read the BCA 488 document, if you read the notes, that's what you're going through. You're waiting. They're waiting to process these, to look at this, to see, okay, here is where we found, you know, David Crowley is guilty, and we're waiting, and it just never happens. It never comes. So these 59 pages, it just does not happen like that. There might be a little bit. There might be something here that we'll see as we read on, but you know, what they process, what they don't process is a very big deal. It's a big deal.
Continuing on, item 41-1 is blood found on the front cover of the notepad. This could mean the notepad was closed before the two messages on page 30 were written. The item was never tested. That's huge.
Yeah, that's
the
a big
item was never tested. And so we've seen this time and time again in the details. Now, item 41-2 was blood found on page 30 of the notepad. Two sentences were written on that page. Once again, open the Rise, most recent version, and submit to Allah now. The blood on this page contained a mixture, keyword mixture, of two or more individuals, with the major DNA profile matching Comel. David and Rania were excluded from being possible contributors to the blood tested on page 30. So who is the source of the other DNA profile or profiles? Period. Now, Greg, this may be one of the most important sentences in your entire book. There's blood on the notepad. They find blood, they do a DNA, they find it's a mixture of multiple people. One is Comel, makes sense. Comel's blood is all over that house.
Mm-hmm.
Who was the second? They test Rania, who was also killed, it's not hers. They test David, who was also killed, it's not his. So my question is, who else was bleeding in that house? That to me is a huge question. But it wasn't it wasn't further research, right?
Nope. There's nothing in these documents, nowhere that shows that they found that out and they did something to find this other DNA profile or the other DNA profiles, because it's, they say a mixture of two or more. So that means it could be other people too.
So it's other people's blood. The question is, who else was in the house? Who else was bleeding in that house? And why wasn't it investigated? Now, this could be one reason and one reason alone to reinvestigate the case or to reopen the case.
That's right. And this is not the first time that we've seen, this unknown DNA source or sources.
Correct.
Could be multiple sources there too. But this also shows why we need to look for, if somebody was bleeding, they could have been bleeding in multiple places of that house, and that blood could have been wiped up, could have been cleaned up. So again, I would ask, what type of thing, what would you need to clean up that house? What to clean up blood? Bleach? I don't know. That would definitely stain. That would leave some type of a residue on the on those walls. I would think, I would hope, but the fact that we have here now 2 points so far that we've gone through that show that there were other DNA sources. We have other people in that house who are, like you said, who are bleeding, who are possibly wounded, and there's no follow-up on that. That is definitely suspicious activity. That is definitely proof of somebody else being in the house. Those are two clear, simple things. Who is reading the DNA reports? When the BCA realizes that they have DNA sources that are unknown, is it their job to further investigate that, or is it just their job to pass it on to the Apple Valley? And is it the Apple Valley's job to further investigate that? Somebody should have. And at this point, we don't know who dropped the ball on that, and I'm not clear whose responsibility is that, or is it all of their responsibility?
Well, I think you'd start with the lead detective, Officer James Gummert, in this case. If the BCA did their job to say, I'm not saying that they didn't, I'm saying that they did. They did do the job, they did the testing, they found out that it was Comel's blood along with someone else.
Right.
How does that phone call get made, or how does that email get sent? How does that information get back to the lead detective, for that lead detective then to either take action or basically just deny it or decline it or not take an action at all? James Gummert, I'm assuming, received that information and decided to do nothing with it. That's where I think the issue comes from. I would be willing to bet that detectives underneath James Gummert who are working this case, this is probably news to them. So my question is, or my statement would be this: I would guess, because in the world of law enforcement and police circles, things work in chain of command. Someone from the BCA would inform the Apple Valley Police Department, and I think that would be the lead person. Gummert would get the information by saying, we did find DNA, it was Comel's blood, but it's a mixture of one or more other individuals. In fact, we've done the research and we've ruled out David and we've ruled out Rania. I think that's all the job of the BCA is to give that information. From then, on that point, they've transferred it. The ball essentially is in the court of Apple Valley Police to say, hey, let's research to find whose blood this is. Mm-hmm. That was never done. My question is, when Gummert receives that information, did he pass that along and investigators look into it, or did he not pass that along and the detectives to this day don't even know it? Which I think then would be, if that was the case, that would be his negligence on his negligence on his part of not doing his job.
Yeah, and
so maybe they did pass it on, and they say, you know what, we're not going to do anything further with this. But we have to look at it from the terms of a cover-up. If it was, who covered it up? How was it covered up? And how do things like this not get investigated? Was Gummert given the information and told by his superior, the police chief, for example, to say, you're not going to do anything with this? And Gummert, obedient as he is, says, sounds good, boss. We won't do anything more with this. I could easily see that happening. But that's still a cover-up. That's still you, Gummert, not doing your job. I know you're taking orders. I know you're obedient to your commanding officer. But your job is to protect and serve the citizens of Apple Valley. That's the oath you took. That's the oath you took. So we still have a problem there. Did he pass it on to his detectives and research? Did he not pass it on? And did he knowingly not pass it on? Was he told not to pass it on? That investigation was not over. The detectives did not complete their job. But if those detectives currently are listening to this program and never heard of such a thing, they didn't know there are multiple DNA, that's where my issue lies on my end. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that's how cover-ups are successfully handled in cases like this. They're not given to the next level down. The next level down is not aware of it. I don't think they'd have a meeting and say, you know what, there's more than Kamel's blood on this. Guys, what should we do? And you know what? Let's all just agree to say nothing in case. Let's get our story straight. We're not going to say anything. I don't think that's how it's done. I think that information is suppressed from the detectives doing the work. And it's suppressed at the sergeant level, at the manager level, or perhaps by someone above him telling him to suppress that information. That's how things like this are successfully covered up, because chain of command. It's all about the chain of command. Mm-hmm. But I do believe, Greg, to come back to your original question, that the BCA did their job in that respect. They did what they did. They found the answers, and they forwarded on to the investigation. And it's up to them, I guess, to take the ball and run with it. And if Apple Valley chose not to do anything about that, I don't think anyone in the BCA is losing sleep today because they know there was more than one person's blood on that notebook, and Apple Valley chose not to do anything. I don't think they'll say that's not, how's that my problem?
Right.
Which is also wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big stain on all of them. The fact that we have, it's such a horrible crime here that we know has happened. We have 3 dead people, very young people, including a 5-year-old child. And I think all of us just kind of, we wanted to think that the investigation would be thorough, as they had told us. As we have heard from the investigators, as we have heard from Kenneth Maines, as we have heard from Eric Nelson, as we have heard from all of the fictitious writers who have covered this case and want to think that David Crowley is guilty. They make it sound like there was a very thorough investigation done here. It sounds like the family, the friends, also think that there was a very thorough investigation done here. I think in these 12 shows that we've done so far, and we're not even halfway through my book, by the way, but just in these 12 shows, I think we've without a shadow of a doubt proven that this was not a thorough investigation, that this family needs a thorough investigation, and that one of the main reasons to get this case reopened is so that we get a thorough investigation. I don't think that's too much to ask for, especially in such a clear-cut case like this. When we talk about things that were tested and weren't tested, we're saying the blood on the desk was not tested. The pen was not tested. The front cover for the notepad was not tested. They did test the page 30, which is good, as they should have, but it's what they found when they tested page 30. That there is another DNA source. There is someone else, at least one or two other people here. Can you picture if they would have tested, they call this item 41-2 is page 30. What if they would have tested item 41-1, which is the front cover? What if they would have tested the bloody ridge detail that they have on page 30, page 31, the back of page 31, the front of page 32, the front of page 33, the front of page 34, the back of page 58? What if they would have tested that? Would they have found the same thing that they found with item 41-2, page 30? Would they have found the same thing, that we have evidence of somebody else's blood at that crime scene? Would that have forced them to do something?
Correct. And I think the whole thing, it really comes down to refusing to reopen the case is more about saving the reputation and the credibility of the Apple Valley Police Department. Boy, if this case gets reopened, this would be one of the first things exposed, and right off the bat, it's going to be a major, major embarrassment. Now, the offset to that is, you and I, Greg, can't reopen the case. We're not family members. But those listening to the podcast who are family members, this could be enough to reopen the case. And I'm talking directly to the Alam family, not the direct family. I'm not talking about the mother, brother, or sister. If you're a cousin, relative, and you wanted this case reopened, you would have a far greater chance of doing that just by presenting this one piece of evidence. Same with the Crowley family. I'm not asking Dan Jr., Dan Sr., or Allison to reopen the case. I know that's not going to happen. But there are relatives, cousins, and loved ones of the family that could take a case like this and have it be reopened because you are part of the family. We're not talking immediate family. But you can have a case reopened if you're family. You'd have much greater success. This would be the case right there. And I would think that members of the Crowley and Alam family, knowing that there was someone else in that house bleeding, I think that would probably be a priority for them to get this case investigated. Because right now it seems to me they're not interested in knowing who else was bleeding in that house. And that I cannot get my head around.
Well said. That's all I got for this one, brother.
That's all I've got too, Greg. Thanks for your time. This is a good, very interesting chapter. In the next episode, number 13, we'll conclude chapter 7 on this office bedroom. But that's all I've got for today.
Awesome. All right. Well, then, until next time, we'll come back and we'll focus more on the notepad and everything else that we haven't covered related to that. Until then, I'm going to go ahead and shut this live stream down, and thank you all again for joining us.